Hey guys, my name is Brianna and this video is going to be the story of my labor with my second baby. Presley Jane joined us on May 20th, 2017. So I wanted to shoot this video. She's now 10 days old as I'm filming this, while the whole labor delivery experience was still pretty fresh in my mind. And it definitely was different than my son's labor, and it was really nice because my husband was there, of course, but also my mom was in the delivery room and she actually filmed. So if you watched Presley Jane's birth vlog, or if you didn't, I'll make sure that it's linked up there and in the description box so you can check it out. My mom is the one who actually filmed for us so that we could have it all recorded on video and have those memories for in the future. I've gotten a lot of questions just since posting that video about the actual labor and delivery, so I'm just going to kind of go in chronological order of what happened that day. Our induction appointment was set for 10 a.m. and the nurse at the doctor's appointment, when they scheduled it, said make sure you eat a really good breakfast beforehand. You won't be allowed to eat anything when you get to the hospital. So FYI for mamas out there who might have an induction date as well. And she also just told us arrive a little bit sooner because there's going to be some questions or other things to actually answer before the induction gets started, and sometimes they can have you do those things prior to the actual induction start time. So my husband and I think we were just really anxious and excited anyways, because we were finally having this baby girl and literally 41 weeks and 6 days pregnant. So we had been waiting and waiting and waiting. And if you want to check out any of those pregnancy updates, I'll have like my pregnancy updates playlist linked too. We got a call around 7:15 a.m. from the hospital in the middle of getting ready, and they told us not to come. They were absolutely full. They said they had every birth room at that point full and people waiting. When we even got to the hospital later and we talked to some of the nurses, they said people were literally laboring in the hallway. So God bless those women. I can't imagine. So needless to say, after so much waiting, it was just another kick in the gut of having to wait even longer to meet our baby girl, which it all turned out perfectly in the end. God has a plan. I trust him. You knew what was supposed to happen, but in the moment, it was just so soul crushing. And I know it's a little bit of an extreme term, but my husband and I were literally like, when we finally had this induction date, even though my doctor told me, you're not going to even make it to this induction date, sure did, and passed it. It just felt like that carrot had been dangled. It was right within our reach, and then it got pulled and cranked away. And so it was just a hard phone call to get that morning. But the nurse on the phone said she would call back within a few hours, or by noon at the latest, with an update. By 12:15, so it was leaving a little afternoon, we were on pins and needles waiting and kind of debating back and forth, like, should we call the hospital? And I said to my husband, no, if they're that crazy, I just want to wait this out. So they called at 12:15, and it was kind of a weird call because when the person on the phone called, they said, are you still here? And I said, no, we received a call from you this morning telling us not to come in at this time. And she said, oh, well, you can come to the hospital now if you would like. So we were already all ready. We hopped in the car really quickly, since we had, 5 extra hours basically to kill during that time. I even cleaned the house some more just to make sure everything was super ready before baby girl came home with us. And we got to the hospital by 1:15. The hospital is about a 40-minute drive from where we live. So we got to the hospital around 1:15, check into the waiting room. We have all of our bags and everything. And we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting. And a half hour later, the head nurse comes out and introduces herself and says, sorry, we've had a really crazy morning. We were like, yeah, we're aware. And she said her assistant called us by mistake. We actually weren't supposed to come in. They were still full. They didn't have space for us. And at this point, I've already kind of, come to the realization, nurses and doctors, even though they are superheroes in the work they do, they're humans just like us. And all I can think in my head is when you've had a really crazy day or your morning starts off rough at work, that affects you and your energy and your ability to focus and do your job the rest of the day. So my fear, and this is what I even said to my husband, if we got there and it was at all chaotic, stressful, I'm not in labor, my water hasn't broken, even though we were 41 weeks and 6 days pregnant, and my doctor said, I don't want you going over 42 weeks, I was a little bit like, if it's not the right environment and it doesn't make me feel comfortable, I don't want to put myself into a situation, like, you don't have to give me the pitocin drugs to kickstart my labor at this point. Like, I would rather just wait, as crazy as that sounds, because I was so ready to have this baby. And in that 30-minute period, even when we were waiting for the head nurse to come out and tell us this news, all the workers and nurses were coming out to get coffee at the coffee machine, and they literally just looked so exhausted. Some of them were even saying, like, man, this has been a day. So it just made me feel more anxiety around the process. So I said to the head nurse, like, if I'm not going to receive high quality care in having this baby, I'm not sure that, you know, I want to put myself in this situation right now. And she assured me, like, no, you should wait here. As soon as the birth room opens up, we're going to put you in it. And I think that was obviously bearing that nobody else comes in labor at that point. So we waited until it was a little bit after 3 o'clock then finally, so it was about another hour and a half in the waiting room. And every time the elevator door banged to open, me and my mom and Adam were like, is it a pregnant person? Because our fear was that somebody would come and, you know, be in labor, and then we would just be waiting even longer, because at this point we're like, okay, we'll wait it out. Because she even said, she's, you know, made a good argument of for how far along you are, even if we rescheduled you to come in tomorrow, there's no guarantee that we don't have another slew of people who go into labor overnight who come in. So she just felt it was best for us to wait. As soon as a room was open for us, we could move into the room, start the pitocin, and then be in labor. So we finally got moved into a room a little bit around, it was around like 3:30, answered all of the hospital questions. 4:15 was finally when the pitocin got administered. So for the first hour of the pitocin, I felt fine. I could feel my contractions getting a little bit stronger. Before they even gave me the pitocin though, I was having contractions 4 minutes apart at that time. They just weren't strong enough. So I think my body was very, very ready for labor, being 41 weeks and 6 days pregnant. I'd been 3 centimeters dilated for nearly 2 weeks as far as I knew at that point, just from when I'd had my exams. And I'd been having much more contractions. They weren't regular enough for me to go to the hospital and be in labor on my own, but I had been having really regular contractions. That first hour didn't hurt, but my contractions were getting stronger. They got to be about 2 minutes apart. The next hour, they started getting a lot stronger, where I was really having to breathe. I had drank a ton of water and was continuing to really try to stay hydrated, just because of all the studies I read that the more hydrated you are, the easier, faster, and less likely to have a C-section. I was drinking a ton, was going to use the bathroom quite a bit, which they actually say, like, sitting on a toilet is one of the positions that can really help with labor. Fun fact. So by the end of the second hour, my contractions were a little under 2 minutes apart. They were about a minute in length, and they were really, really painful. And I'm the type of person, when I'm having my contractions, I was literally like, Adam and my mom, don't touch me. I just needed them to remind me to breathe, because my natural instinct was to just like tense up and stop breathing, and that actually makes the contractions even worse. So I needed them to be like, breathe, breathe, breathe. And, you know, I was trying to take as big of breaths as I possibly could, just to kind of let each contraction pass. They're kind of like a big wave. Like, you can feel them and they hurt, and then it like hurts more and more and more and more, and then it slowly stops hurting as much. So it's like just really important to maintain good breathing. At least that's what helped me a lot. And I was sitting on the birthing ball. I was just also crouched over, like, on the bed. Like, we elevated the bed as high as it would go, and I like would put my elbows on it and sort of like stick my butt out. And those were the two positions. Like, I wanted to be standing during my contractions. Like, it really wasn't helping me to be laying down in bed. I wanted to be up, moving around, also so I could just get to the bathroom really quickly, which is a little harder than you think, because when you have the pitocin, you're hooked up to the IV, so you actually have to like get unhooked from the monitors, drag the entire like IV roller thing with you into the bathroom. So it was just a little bit more complicated. And the big thing Adam would make fun of me for is the nurse kept asking me on a scale of 1 to 10, using this like chart, what is your pain? And at this point I was saying, oh, like a 4. And he's like, look at the chart. The chart at a 4 is like, there's still a tiny bit of a smile. He's like, you cannot breathe. He's like, you look like you're about to cry every time you have a contraction. Your pain is not at a 4. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just me that I like try to be super tough or what, but I kind of realized he was right. And I said, okay, you know, with just how intense these are and them being a minute long but 2 minutes apart, which really means you only have a minute to sort of regain yourself or recoup, I started to get to the point where I was like, okay, this is really taking a lot out of me. I think now is the time to get the epidural. I wanted to kind of see how it went. She called in for the epidural, and while we were waiting for the anesthesiologist to come in, I had a really, again, intense contraction at this point. They were really painful. Sorry, my battery died. But I had a really intense contraction. I was leaned up against the bed and I felt a trickle between my legs and looked in the ground, and there was like a spatter of blood, and kind of said to the nurse like, something just happened. And she's like, oh, I think your water just broke. And so what we were waiting for the anesthesiologist to come in, she's like, lay down, let me check and see, like we have to check and see how far along you are. And at that point I was 5 centimeters dilated, and she said my bag of waters had like bulged out. So the contractions were definitely making me dilate and progress. And in my head, I was a bit like, man, for how intense these contractions have been, 2 hours into this, to have only moved 2 centimeters can kind of mentally make you feel like, oh, how long is this going to be? But even waiting for the anesthesiologist to come in, I was just in more and more intense pain. So by the time the anesthesiologist got there to start the epidural, the whole process took around 15 minutes. It was a little bit after 7 o'clock at this point. And they were, you know, putting it in. Adam and my mom had been asked to leave the room, so it was just me, the nurse, the anesthesiologist, and his assistant. And I was gripping onto this sweet nurse, Melissa. She is an angel. I was just gripping onto her hands. She was coaching me to breathe, because it was actually really hard. You have to stay so still, and you kind of have to get in this weird position where they gave me like a pillow to grab onto, and you have to like tuck your chin down, lean forward, and they kind of said like curl up like a shrimp is basically like what you had to do. But when you're having contractions, that's just not the position that felt comfortable at all to me. So I was having these contractions in this uncomfortable position, trying to stay as still as possible. So I swear part of the reason why I felt so beat up even the next few days was of holding myself in that position for like 10 minutes and being so tight in my back. I think that's why my back was so sore after birth. But they gave me the epidural. I instantly, like once they said, okay, like we've administered the first dose, I immediately felt the pain in my abdomen, like the contractions in my abdomen. That pain went away. I no longer felt like the wind was being knocked out of me. However, and I said this to the nurse instantly, I was like, I can still wiggle my toes and move my legs a bit, and like there was still pressure. It didn't hurt as bad. It still hurt though in my butt and down my thighs. I was like, I can still feel things like in my legs and in my butt. And I said to her, it feels like the baby's falling out right now. And she was like, uh-oh. And I like was shaking really bad. Again, my pain had definitely decreased from how it had actually felt up until that point. But I was shaking really, really badly. I think even in the birth vlog, if you look right before I started pushing, like I was literally shaking nonstop, like the entire bed was shaking. Even Adam was like, everything is shaking right now because of you. It was just really intense shaking. And the nurse said to me afterwards, she's like, as soon as I saw you started shaking and when you told me it felt like the baby was falling out, I knew we were much further along than what I'd even thought when I checked you right before the epidural. And sure enough, I was at 10 centimeters. So I think I was in the beginning of that transitional labor as they were administering the epidural. And I asked the anesthesiologist the next day, just because with my son, I mean, I could not stand for hours after I had my son. Adam was even carrying me to the bathroom like later on that night just because I could barely walk. Like my legs were really unstable. And she said, yeah, because of, you know, just how quickly you progressed, you only got half of a dose and you didn't get even like the follow-up one that they would have given, because when the nurse checked me, she was like, the doctor needs to come in, like we are ready to push. And this was one of the other new terms I used. I didn't learn this with my son. So when she did check me right after the epidural, I was 10 centimeters dilated and my station was +3, which the way I've read about it, and she sort of explained it because I asked her afterwards, you know, because she said it to the doctor as soon as the doctor came in. Basically, if you're in the negatives, the baby is still floating above your pelvis. If the baby's at 0, the head is locked into your pelvis. So any centimeter past your pelvis is the baby's kind of coming out, or that crowning as they call it. So her head was already a +3, so I really was feeling that the baby was falling out. And you can see this in the birth vlog too. I pushed 3 times and Presley was fully out. Her head was already basically coming out at the point I started pushing with the doctor. And even my mom said, like, she looked before she started filming and could see that Presley had hair. The baby was just falling out. And once she was out, they laid her on my chest, and that to me is just like the best moment in the whole wide world, is when your baby gets laid on your chest and you smell them and feel them and hear them crying, and it is just the most magical moment on the planet. I don't know how, you know, after that experience, you just have to be like, wow, there's a God, there's a higher power. At least that's how I feel. I was just so reconnected to my spirituality in that moment, because it's just such a miracle. Like, birth is so incredible. The fact that this tiny human was smaller than a poppy seed inside of me and then grew to this watermelon-sized, beautiful baby girl who's breathing and laying on you. It's incredible. It is just, birth is the coolest experience in the whole wide world, which is why I also love watching other people's birth vlogs or pregnancy experiences or anything around having a baby. It is just so cool. But as she's laying on my chest, she pooped all over me within 10 seconds. Adam said it was like green leaky poop all over the place. So they ripped me out of my cute pink polka dot hospital gown, which, you know, it's to be expected that it's gonna get destroyed and gross. And then I actually had to push my placenta out this time with Landon. It just kind of all came out, I think, or came out like very easily. I didn't have to push with Landon. And this time I did just a couple of times and it came out pretty easy. Adam then cut the cord, which he did with Landon too. So I feel like that's always special when daddy gets to do that. And the doctor told me, because what I'd asked the doctor as we'd first started the pitocin and she came in to introduce herself, because it wasn't my OB that I'd been seeing, it was the doctor that was on call. I'd said to her, like, I want to push a lot slower this time, because with my son, I tore really badly. I tore in 2 places, 3rd-degree tears. Recovery was not fun. She's like, okay. Well, Presley came out super fast, and I was like, did I tear? And she's like, you have the slightest tear. I could probably not stitch you, but I'm just going to give you 1 stitch to, you know, be on the safe side so you heal up well. So this delivery, despite being really fast, at least tearing wise, ended in a lot nicer result than with my son, and I'm feeling so much better. It literally took me a full 6 weeks with Landon because of how bad I tore to even feel like I could sit down and be comfortable again. And it's 10 days later and it's not super comfortable, but I can walk around, I can move around, and I can sit without feeling like I'm dying like I was last time. But the part of the epidural not being the full dose that I actually really liked this time, that also was just nice for recovery, is that I was able to get up to go to the bathroom after all was said and done. So after having the baby, after the placenta was delivered, after they stitched me, those kind of things, I got up to go to the bathroom 10 minutes after that. A lot of times with an epidural, you end up needing a catheter just because you can't get up, and you know, they want to make sure that your bladder is being emptied really regularly so that it doesn't interfere with your uterus contracting to go back down to size. and I was actually able to stand up and go to the bathroom afterwards. So to me, it was kind of the best of both worlds. When I've watched a lot of mamas talk about having a natural, drug-free birth, they talk about the fact that, hey, I could get up and walk around really quickly after birth, and I feel like I could do that, but my pain got minimized during the actual delivery process, or like during that really tough transition process, so that I could still enjoy her being born. I wasn't like in agonizing pain during that period, but then I could still get up and was really mobile right after having her. Okay, so I think that's it for my labor and delivery story. I did do a 1-week postpartum update, just kind of going through every day after the delivery, sort of how I was feeling, and just some of then the products that are super important for mama postpartum. And I also have Presley's 1-week update, so just kind of her progress over the first week after she was born. If you're all curious and want to check out those videos, I'll make sure that there's links for those as well. But I just want to thank all of you so much who've been following along on this journey, whether it's been for the full pregnancy or whether you joined towards the end. Your kind words and comments, I say this, but I'm just so grateful. It is just so nice to know there's such kind folks out there who are so supportive and loving and thoughtful. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I always feel the need to make a time to say thank you so much for the kind comments or messages that you send me. And if you have any other videos you'd like to see, leave those in the comments below. I will be home for maternity leave for the next 10.5 weeks now we're down to. And I'm going to be doing an upcoming Q&A, so if there is a question you have for me that you would like to see answered, please leave that in the comments below, because I would love to make sure that I addressed any questions you have that I didn't talk about in any of my videos. I'll see you guys in my next one.